Princess Lyra stood on the highest tower of the royal palace, watching her world die. The beautiful crystal spires that had taken her ancestors 1,000 years to build were breaking apart under the heavy fire from the enemy ships above. Each blast sent pieces of glowing crystal, falling like deadly rain onto the streets below. The Vorthek had come without warning 3 days ago. Their black ships filled the sky like angry clouds, blocking out the twin suns that had always shone. On the Zephyrian Empire, the insect-like creatures inside those ships wanted only one thing: to crush every living being that stood in their way. "Your Highness, we must leave now," said General Kavan, her oldest military advisor. His blue skin was pale with fear, and his usually perfect uniform was torn and dirty. "The shields around the palace are failing. The evacuation ships are ready." Lyra closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, using the psychic abilities that all Zephyrians possessed. She could feel the terror of her people as they ran through the burning streets. She could sense the cold, hungry minds of the Vorthek soldiers as they moved through the city, destroying everything in their path. "How many have we lost?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would break her heart. "Half the fleet is gone, Your Highness. The ground forces are scattered. We estimate that 60% of the capital city has been destroyed." Kavan's voice cracked as he spoke. "The other planets in our system have already fallen. We are the last." Lyra had always known this day might come. The Vorthek hegemony had been moving across the galaxy for months, consuming entire star systems. World after world had fallen to their endless hunger for conquest. The Zephyrians had hoped their advanced technology and psychic powers would be enough to stop them. They had been wrong. "The children and elderly?" Lyra asked. "Safe aboard the evacuation ships, along with our most important scientists and cultural leaders. But we can only save a few thousand. The rest—" Kavan could not finish the sentence. A massive explosion shook the tower, and Lyra grabbed the crystal railing to keep from falling. Through the smoke and fire, she could see Vorthek landing ships touching down in the royal gardens. The creatures that poured out looked like giant ants walking on 2 legs, their black armor gleaming in the firelight. "Send the evacuation ships now," Lyra ordered. "Do not wait for me. Your Highness, you must come with us. The people need their princes to survive. You are the last of the royal bloodline." Lyra looked at her reflection in the broken crystal wall. Her pale purple skin was marked with the silver lines that showed her royal heritage. Her large dark eyes held tears that would not fall. She was only 25 years old, but today she felt ancient. "I will follow in the last ship," she said. "Someone must coordinate the final defense to buy time for the evacuation." Far above the dying planet, in the cold darkness of space, Captain Jake Morrison watched the battle through the viewscreen of his ship. The Horizon was a small exploration vessel, one of humanity's first attempts at deep space travel. Jake and his crew had been mapping this sector of the galaxy when they stumbled upon the Vorthek attack. "Sir, we should leave," said Lieutenant Pete Brooks, his second-in-command. Earth Command was very clear about not getting involved in alien conflicts. Jake stared at the destruction below. He had seen war before, during the conflicts on Earth, but nothing like this. The Vorthek were not just defeating their enemies, they were erasing them completely. Every building, every piece of art, every trace of Zephyrian culture was being systematically destroyed. "How long until their fleet notices us?" Jake asked. "At this distance, probably another hour before their sensors pick us up," answered Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the sensor station. "But sir, we cannot fight them. There are hundreds of their ships down there." Jake was 34 years old, a career military officer who had spent his life following orders. He had dark hair that was starting to turn gray and eyes that had seen too much war. His crew trusted him completely, which made his next decision even harder. "How many refugee ships are trying to escape?" he asked. 17 ships launched from the planet so far," Sarah reported. "But the Vorthek are hunting them down. Only 3 have made it past the blockade." Jake watched as another Zephyrian ship exploded in a ball of fire. He knew that each ship carried thousands of innocent people, families, children, old people who had never hurt anyone. The Vorthak showed no mercy. "Sir, what are your orders?" Pete asked. Jake looked at his crew of 12 men and women. They were all young, all eager to explore the galaxy and make humanity proud. None of them had signed up to fight in an alien war. But Jake remembered something his father had told him long ago. Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. "We are going to help them," Jake said quietly. "Sir?" Pete's voice was confused. "We are going to help those refugee ships escape. Sarah, find me the best route through their blockade. Pete, charge all weapon systems. I know we are not a warship, but we have enough firepower to cause some trouble. Captain, Earth Command specifically ordered us not to interfere with alien conflicts." Pete reminded him. Jake stood up from his command chair. "Then it is a good thing Earth Command is not here to stop us." Down on the planet, Princess Lyra was in the final evacuation ship, racing through the burning atmosphere toward space. The small vessel shook violently as Vorthak fighters chased it, their energy weapons lighting up the sky. "We will not make it," the pilot said. "There are too many of them." Lyra moved to the front of the ship and placed her hands on the pilot's shoulders. She reached out with her mind, using her psychic abilities to help him fly. Together they dodged through the maze of enemy fire, the ship dancing between the deadly energy beams. But there were too many Vorthak ships. Just as they reached the edge of space, 3 enemy fighters moved to block their path. Lyra could feel the fear of the 50 other refugees behind her. These were the last survivors of her people, and they were about to die. Suddenly, bright flashes of light filled the space ahead of them. The 3 Vorthak fighters exploded in quick succession, destroyed by weapons fire from an unknown ship. Through the smoke and debris, Lyra saw a vessel unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was smaller than most military ships, with a design that seemed both practical and somehow hopeful. On its hull were symbols in a language she did not recognize, and colors that spoke of a world with blue skies and green oceans. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earthship Horizon," a voice came over the communication system. "Follow us, we will escort you to safety." Lyra had never heard of Earth or humans before, but something in the captain's voice made her trust him. As their ship followed the strange vessel away from her dying world, she wondered who these humans were and why they had risked their lives to save strangers behind them. The Vorthak fleet continued their work of destruction. Within hours, there would be nothing left of the Zephyrian Empire except memories and the few thousand survivors now fleeing into the dark between the stars. Princess Lyra looked back one last time at the world where she had been born, where her ancestors had ruled for centuries. Then she closed her eyes and tried to imagine what kind of people would risk everything to save others. They had never met. She would soon find out that humans were unlike any species in the galaxy, and that meeting them would change not just her life, but the fate of every free world in the universe. 3 months had passed since the fall of the Zephyrian Empire, and Princess Lyra barely remembered what freedom felt like. The heavy metal chains around her wrists had rubbed her skin raw, and the constant pain reminded her every moment that she was no longer a princess. She was property of the Vorthak hegemony. The slave ship where she now lived was a nightmare of metal and darkness. Hundreds of beings from dozens of different worlds were crammed into cages barely large enough to lie down in. The air was thick with the smell of fear, desperation, and death. Every day, some of the weaker prisoners died, and the Vorthak guards would simply throw their bodies into space. Lyra sat in her cage, watching the alien creatures around her. There were the tall, plant-like beings from the verdant worlds, their green skin now brown and dying without sunlight. Next to them were the small, furry creatures from the ice planets, shivering in the artificial cold that the Vorthak kept throughout. "The ship, Princess," whispered a voice from the cage next to hers. It was Commander Vex, one of the few other Zephyrians who had survived the destruction of their world. His once proud military uniform was now torn rags, and his blue skin was covered in bruises. "You must stay strong. Our people need you to survive?" Lyra looked at him with tired eyes. What people, Vex? Look around us. We are all that is left. The truth was bitter but undeniable. Of the billions of Zephyrians who had lived on their beautiful crystal world, only a few hundred had escaped. Most of those had been killed during the 3 months of running and hiding. Now perhaps 50 of her people remained scattered across different slave ships. The metal door at the end of the cargo hold slid open with a harsh grinding sound. Vorthok guards entered, their insect-like faces showing no emotion as they looked at their prisoners. Behind them walked a figure that made every captive shrink back in terror. Overlord Crixthek was the commander of this slave fleet and one of the most feared Vorthok in the galaxy. His black armor was decorated with the symbols of conquered worlds, and his 4 arms each carried a different weapon. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding metal. "Bring the Zephyrian female," he commanded in the common galactic language. The guards unlocked Lyra's cage and dragged her out, her chains clanking against the metal floor. She tried to stand with dignity, but months of poor food and constant fear had weakened her body. Still, she kept her head high as they brought her before the Overlord. "So, you are the princess of the dead world," Crixthek said, studying her with his compound eyes. "Your people fought better than most, but in the end, you all died just the same." "Not all," Lyra said quietly. "Some of us survived to remember what you did." The Overlord made a sound that might have been laughter. "Yes, a few hundred out of billions. Enough to serve as slaves, but not enough to ever threaten us again. You should be honored, princess. You will live to see many more worlds fall." Crixthek gestured to one of his guards, who activated a large viewing screen. On it, Lyra could see star maps showing the movement of Vorthok fleets across the galaxy. Red symbols marked worlds that had already fallen, while blue symbols showed their next targets. "We are currently studying a new species," the Overlord continued. "They call themselves humans. They have only recently developed space travel and seem to be quite primitive. Their worlds are poorly defended, and their technology is inferior to most galactic civilizations." Lyra's heart jumped. Humans, that was the species that had saved her people from the dying planet. Captain Jake Morrison had risked his life to help complete strangers, but now his people were about to face the same fate as hers. "You know something about them," Crixthek observed, watching her face carefully. "Good, you will help us understand these humans before we destroy them." "I will tell you nothing," Lyra said, though she knew it was useless to resist. The Overlord nodded to his guards. Pain shot through Lyra's body as they activated the torture devices built into her chains. She screamed and fell to her knees, her psychic abilities useless against the alien technology. "You will tell us everything," Crixthek said calmly. "Or you will watch as we torture your surviving people one by one until you do." Over the following days, Lyra learned more about the Vorthok plans than she had ever wanted to know. They had been studying human settlements for weeks, watching their patrol patterns and military responses. The humans seemed to favor small, fast ships over large battleships. Their weapons were kinetic rather than energy-based, and their tactics were unpredictable. "They fight like animals," one of the Vorthok officers reported during a briefing that Lyra was forced to attend. "No discipline, no proper formation. They seem to make up their strategies as they go along." "Perfect," Crixthek replied. "Animals are easy to slaughter." But Lyra remembered something different about the humans who had saved her. Captain Morrison had not fought like an animal. He had been careful, smart, and willing to sacrifice himself to save others. There had been something in his eyes that reminded her of the greatest Zephyrian heroes, a refusal to give up, even when facing impossible odds. "You are wrong about them," she said quietly. The Overlord turned to look at her. "Explain." "Humans do not fight like animals," Lyra continued, knowing that speaking would probably mean more torture. "They fight like something far more dangerous. They fight like beings who refuse to accept defeat." Crixthek struck her across the face with one of his armored hands. "Silence. No species has ever refused to accept defeat when facing the hegemony. The humans will fall just like all the others. But Lyra had seen something in her brief encounter with the humans that the Vorthak had missed. While other species relied on superior technology or natural abilities, the humans had something else. They had hope. Even when saving her people had seemed impossible, Captain Morrison had tried anyway. Days passed in the cold darkness of the slave ship. Lyra was forced to watch as the Vorthak fleet moved toward human space, their ships arranged in the same formation that had destroyed 100 worlds. She tried to warn them about human unpredictability, but the Vorthak commanders dismissed her words as the desperate lies of a defeated enemy. "The humans have only 3 small colonies in this sector," reported the fleet intelligence officer. "New Haven, Riverside, and Greenfield. All are lightly defended farming worlds with minimal military presence." "We will start with New Haven," Krikstek decided. "It has the largest population and will provide the most slaves. The other worlds will surrender when they see what happens to those who resist." The night before the attack, Lyra lay in her cage, listening to the quiet sobs of her fellow prisoners. Tomorrow, another species would face the same fate that had befallen her people. She thought about Captain Morrison and wondered if he was still alive, if he had made it back to his homeworld to warn them. She closed her eyes and tried to reach out with her weakened psychic abilities, searching the vast darkness of space for any sign of human thoughts. For just a moment, she thought she felt something, a mind full of determination and anger, preparing for a fight that seemed impossible to win. "Fight them," she whispered into the darkness, though she knew no one could hear her. "Fight them like you fought to save us. Show them that some spirits cannot be broken." The next morning, the Vorthak fleet arrived at New Haven. The planet looked peaceful from space, its green continents and blue oceans reminding Lyra of the pictures she had seen of Earth. Soon, she knew those beautiful landscapes would be burning, just like her crystal cities had burned. But as the first Vorthak ships moved toward the planet, something unexpected happened. The humans were waiting for them. The Vorthak fleet approached New Haven expecting to find frightened farmers and simple miners. Instead, they found Captain Lisa Carter, waiting for them with everything humanity could throw at the alien invaders. Lisa stood on the bridge of the defense station that orbited the planet, watching the enemy ships move closer. She was a tall woman with short red hair and green eyes that burned with determination. At 38 years old, she had spent most of her life preparing for this moment, even though she had never imagined the enemy would come from the stars. "How many ships are we facing?" she asked her communications officer, Lieutenant Ben Taylor. "Sensors show 47 enemy vessels, Captain. They are moving in standard attack formation, just like the reports from Captain Morrison described." Lisa nodded grimly. Jake Morrison had made it back to Earth after his rescue mission, bringing with him detailed information about Vorthak tactics and technology. The military had called him a hero, but Lisa knew the real test was just beginning. "All units, this is Captain Carter," she spoke into her communicator. "The enemy is approaching as expected. Remember, we are not just defending New Haven. We are showing the galaxy that humanity will not go quietly into the night." The response came from dozens of ships hidden throughout the solar system. Human vessels were scattered among the asteroids, behind the planet's moons, and even inside the upper atmosphere. Unlike other species that fought in neat formations, the humans had spread out in a pattern that seemed random, but was actually carefully planned. Aboard the Vorthak command ship, Overlord Krikstek studied the human defenses with contempt. "They have less than 30 ships," he told his officers, "and most of them are cargo vessels with weapons attached. This will be easier than expected." Princess Lyra, chained to a wall where she could see the battle screens, watched the two fleets prepare to fight. The Vorthak ships were massive and powerful, each one capable of destroying a city. The human ships looked tiny and fragile in comparison. "Begin the attack," Krikstek commanded. "Show these primitives what happens when they resist the hegemony." The Vorthak fleet moved forward in perfect formation, their energy weapons charging for the first strike. But as they approached the planet, something unexpected happened. The human ships did not meet them in open battle. Instead, they scattered like leaves in the wind, each one moving in a different direction. "Where are they going?" demanded the Vorthak tactical officer. "This is not how battles are supposed to be fought." Captain Carter smiled as she watched the enemy confusion from her command station. "All units, execute plan crazy even, show them how humans really fight." The first human ship to attack was not a warship at all. It was a mining vessel called the Rock Hammer, commanded by a former miner named Tony Rodriguez. Instead of expensive military weapons, Tony's ship carried the same equipment used to break apart asteroids. As the Vorthak ships passed by, he targeted their engines with mining lasers and demolition charges. "Got one," Tony shouted over the radio as a Vorthak cruiser lost power and began to drift. "These bugs don't know what hit them." Across the battlefield, other human ships were using equally creative tactics. The passenger liner Freedom, commanded by Captain Mary Johnson, had been converted into a massive electronic warfare platform. Instead of trying to destroy enemy ships, Mary's crew was jamming their communications and feeding false information to their sensors. "Enemy ship Zulu 7 is reporting that their own fleet is firing on them," reported Lieutenant Ben Taylor, barely able to keep the excitement out of his voice. "They are breaking formation to avoid friendly fire that isn't even happening." Princess Lyra watched in amazement as the human battle plan unfolded. Where the Zephyrians had relied on superior technology and the Vorthak used overwhelming force, the humans were using something completely different. They were fighting smart, turning their weaknesses into strengths and their enemy's power against them. "This is impossible," Krixthek snarled as his perfectly organized fleet began to fall apart. "They are not following any known tactical doctrine." "That is exactly the point," Lyra said quietly, speaking for the first time since the battle began. "Humans do not fight the way you expect them to fight." The Overlord struck her with his armored hand, but he was too distracted by the battle to put much force behind the blow. On the screens, his ships were being picked apart by an enemy that refused to stand still and fight properly. Captain Carter watched as her unconventional strategy began to work. The human ships were taking damage, but they were giving much more than they received. More importantly, they were proving that the Vorthak were not invincible. "Captain, we are receiving a transmission from the surface," reported Lieutenant Taylor. "It's from the planetary militia." "Put them through," Carter ordered. The voice that came over the speakers belonged to Colonel Frank Murphy, the leader of New Haven's ground forces. "Captain Carter, the bugs are trying to land troops in Sector 7. We are ready for them." "Understood, Colonel. Give them hell." Down on the planet's surface, the Vorthak landing ships were touching down in what they thought was an empty farming area. The Frank Murphy and his militia had been preparing for this moment for weeks. The empty fields were actually filled with hidden bunkers, camouflaged weapons, and traps that would make the aliens pay for every step they took. The first Vorthak soldiers to leave their ships stepped directly into carefully prepared kill zones. Human defenders opened fire from positions that had been invisible moments before. The aliens found themselves fighting not just soldiers, but farmers who knew every inch of their land, miners who could make explosives out of fertilizer, and engineers who had turned farming equipment into weapons of war. "They are everywhere," reported a Vorthak ground commander. "The entire population appears to be armed and hostile." Krixthek could not believe what he was seeing. On every world the Vorthak had conquered, the civilian population had either fled or surrendered. But on New Haven, even the children were fighting back with slingshots and homemade bombs. "This is not how civilized beings behave," he said to Princess Lyra. "They are supposed to surrender when they realize they cannot win." "But they are winning," Lyra pointed out, gesturing at the battle screens. "Look at your fleet. Look at your ground forces. The humans are not just surviving, they are defeating you." It was true. Despite their superior technology and numbers, the Vorthak were losing the battle. Their ships were being destroyed by tactics they had never encountered before. Their ground forces were being torn apart by an enemy that seemed to be hiding behind every rock and tree, but the real shock came when Captain Carter announced the next phase of the human counterattack. All units, this is Carter. Execute rescue protocol. We have intelligence about enemy prison ships in this system. Princess Lyra's heart leaped as she heard those words. The humans were not just defending themselves, they were going to try to rescue the prisoners held by the Vorthek. She had never heard of any species attempting such a dangerous mission during a battle. Impossible, Crixthek muttered. They cannot possibly know about the slave ships? But the humans did know. Jake Morrison had provided detailed information about Vorthak slave operations, and the human military had been planning rescue missions for weeks. As the battle raged around New Haven, small teams of human special forces were already moving toward the prison ships. One of those teams was led by Jake Morrison himself. He had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of all, infiltrating the command ship where the most important prisoners were being held. As his small fighter approached the massive Vorthak vessel, he thought about the alien refugees he had saved months ago. This is for all the species that couldn't fight back, he said to himself as he prepared to board the enemy ship. Time to show these bugs what humans do to bullies. Princess Lyra felt a strange sensation as the human rescue teams approached. For the first time in months, she dared to hope that freedom might be possible. The humans were proving that even the mighty Vorthak could be defeated by beings who refused to give up. The battle for New Haven was far from over, but already it was clear that the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had announced its presence with a declaration that would echo across the stars. They would not surrender, they would not submit, and they would fight for everyone who could not fight for themselves. Jake Morrison's small fighter ship slipped through the chaos of battle, heading straight for the massive Vorthak command vessel. Around him, the space near New Haven was filled with burning ships and debris from both sides. The human defense was holding, but Jake knew the real prize was aboard that enemy ship. "This is Rescue Team Alpha," he spoke into his radio. "Beginning infiltration of the primary target. If we don't make it back, tell everyone that humans don't abandon their friends." Jake's ship was specially modified for stealth operations. Dr. Amy Rodriguez, a brilliant human scientist, had worked with alien refugees to create technology that could fool Vorthak sensors. The ship's hull was covered with a coating that made it nearly invisible to enemy detection systems. Inside the Vorthak command ship, Princess Lyra felt a strange stirring in her mind. Her psychic abilities, weakened by months of captivity, were picking up something unusual. There were human thoughts nearby, thoughts filled with determination and a fierce desire to help others. "Someone is coming," she whispered to Commander Vex in the cage next to hers. "Who?" the old Zephyrian asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Humans," Lyra said, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to smile. Overlord Crixthek was too busy with the battle to notice the small ship that had attached itself to his vessel's docking bay. His forces were being torn apart by human tactics that made no sense according to traditional military doctrine. Every time he thought he understood their strategy, the humans would do something completely unexpected. Jake and his team of 6 soldiers moved through the Vorthak ship's corridors like ghosts. They had studied the ship's layout for weeks, using intelligence gathered from previous battles. The humans wore light armor that allowed them to move quickly and quietly, while their weapons were designed to be effective against Vorthak technology. Motion. "Sensors ahead," whispered Sergeant Linda Hayes, Jake's second-in-command. 2 guards." Jake signaled for his team to stop. Unlike the Vorthak, who relied on brute force, the humans used stealth and precision. They waited until the guards turned away, then moved past them without making a sound. The prison section of the ship was a maze of cages and torture chambers. Jake's team had to stop several times to avoid patrols, but their training and equipment allowed them to remain undetected. As they moved deeper into the ship, they began to hear the sounds of suffering from the prisoners. "There," Jake pointed to a section where the cages were larger and more heavily guarded. "That's where they keep the important prisoners." Princess Lyra's heart was racing as the human thoughts grew stronger in her mind. She could sense their approach, feel their determination to rescue people they had never met. It was something she had never experienced from any other species. Princess, Commander Vex said urgently, something is happening. The guards are nervous. It was true. The Vorthak guards were receiving reports about the battle above, and their usual confidence was beginning to crack. The humans were not just winning, they were making the mighty Vorthak look like fools. Jake's team reached the prison section and quickly assessed the situation. There were 12 guards watching over hundreds of prisoners from dozens of different species. The humans would have to move fast and strike hard to avoid a massacre. Remember, Jake whispered to his team, we save everyone we can. No one gets left behind. The attack was swift and brutal. The human soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, their weapons designed to drop the Vorthak guards before they could raise an alarm. Within minutes, the prison section was secure. Free the prisoners, Jake ordered. Linda, get the ship ready for emergency departure. We have maybe 10 minutes before they figure out what happened. As the cage doors opened, Princess Lyra found herself face to face with the human who had saved her people months ago. Jake Morrison looked older than she remembered, with new scars on his face and a hardness in his eyes that spoke of the battles he had fought. Princess Lyra, he said, recognizing her immediately. I told you we would find a way to help. Captain Morrison, she replied, struggling to stand after months of captivity. You came back for us. Humans don't abandon their friends, Jake said simply. Can you walk? Lyra nodded, though her legs were weak from confinement. Around them, other prisoners were being helped by Jake's team. The humans showed no discrimination. They helped everyone equally, regardless of species or origin. We have to move, Sergeant Hayes reported. Enemy reinforcements are heading this way. The escape from the Vorthak ship was chaos. Alarms were sounding throughout the vessel as the guards discovered the prison break. Jake's team fought their way through corridors filled with angry Vorthak soldiers, protecting the freed prisoners as they moved toward the docking bay. Princess Lyra stayed close to Jake, using her weakened psychic abilities to warn him of dangers ahead. She was amazed by how the humans fought, not just with weapons but with intelligence and creativity. They used the ship's own systems against its crew, turning off lights and sealing doors to confuse their enemies. There, Jake pointed to. Their escape ship. Everyone aboard now. The small vessel was crowded with over 60 freed prisoners, but Jake's team made it work. As they launched from the Vorthak ship, enemy fighters were already moving to intercept them. The rescue ships. Pilot, Lieutenant Rick Foster, pushed the engines to their limits as they raced toward the human fleet. This is Rescue Team Alpha, Jake radioed to Captain Carter. Package secured. We have Princess Lyra and 59 other prisoners, requesting immediate medical assistance. Understood, Alpha Team, came Carter's reply. Well done, medical teams. Are standing by. But the rescue was only the beginning. As the human fleet regrouped after their victory at New Haven, they found themselves receiving unexpected messages from across the galaxy. Word of humanity's success against the Vorthak had spread faster than anyone imagined. Captain, reported. Lieutenant Taylor, we are receiving communications from 17 different species. They are all asking for help against the Vorthak. Lisa Carter looked at the messages with amazement. The Kaleri, known for their energy manipulation abilities, were offering to share their technology. The Andorians, master shipbuilders, wanted to join the human fleet. Even scattered survivors from worlds that had been destroyed were asking to fight alongside humanity. Princess Lyra, recovering in the medical bay, was visited by Dr. Amy Rodriguez. The human scientist was fascinated by Zephyrian psychic abilities and wanted to understand how they might be combined with human technology. Your people have something unique, Amy told her. Not just your psychic powers, but your knowledge of Vorthak tactics and technology. If we work together, we might be able to develop new weapons and strategies. Why are you helping us? Lyra asked. Your species barely knows us. We cannot offer you anything in return. Amy smiled. That's not how humans think. We help because it's the right thing to do. And because we believe that every species deserves freedom. Over the following weeks, Jake found himself coordinating with representatives from a dozen different species. The humans had become the center of a growing alliance, not because they were the strongest or most advanced, but because they were the only ones willing to fight for everyone else. Princess Lyra worked closely with Jake's team, sharing everything. She knew about Vorthak weaknesses and ship designs. She was constantly amazed by human ingenuity, their ability to take information from multiple sources and combine it into something new and effective. "Your species is remarkable," she told Jake one evening as they planned their next mission. "You see solutions where others see only problems." "We have to," Jake replied. "We're not the biggest or strongest species in the galaxy, but we're stubborn and we don't give up. Sometimes that's enough." The growing alliance faced its first major test when the Vorthak sent a massive fleet to destroy the human colonies. But this time, humanity would not be fighting alone. Ships from a dozen species were gathering at the coordinates Jake had transmitted, ready to prove that the age of Vorthak dominance was coming to an end. Princess Lyra stood on the bridge of the human flagship, watching as the Allied fleet prepared for battle. For the first time since her world had burned, she felt hope. The humans had not just rescued her body, they had rescued her spirit, and the spirit of every species that had chosen to stand with them. "Are you ready?" Jake asked, standing beside her. "Yes," she replied, her voice strong for the first time in months. "Let's show the galaxy that freedom is worth fighting for." The final battle for the galaxy took place in the Vorthak home system, where 3 suns burned red above a world that had never known defeat. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the flagship Unity, watching as the largest fleet in galactic history prepared to face the heart of the Vorthak Empire. Ships from 23 different species filled the space around him. The sleek vessels of the Kaleri glowed with stored energy. The massive Andorian battleships bristled with weapons that could crack planets. Zephyrian survivors flew ships powered by psychic energy, while human vessels darted between the larger craft like hunting wolves. "All fleet commanders report status," Jake spoke into his communicator. 6 months ago, he had been a simple exploration captain. Now he commanded the largest military force ever assembled. "Kaleri energy weapons charged and ready," came the voice of Commander Zala. "Andorian heavy assault ships in position," reported Admiral Thoric. "Zephyrian psychic warfare division standing by," said Princess Lyra from her position at the tactical station. Jake looked at Lyra and smiled. The alien princess had changed greatly since her rescue. Her pale purple skin had regained its healthy glow, and the silver lines that marked her royal heritage now seemed to shine with inner light. More importantly, she had found her purpose. "Again, human fleet ready for combat," reported Captain Lisa Carter from her position aboard the Defense Command ship. "All rescue teams are prepared for prisoner extraction." The plan was ambitious and dangerous. While the main fleet engaged the Vorthak Home Defense Forces, special teams would infiltrate the prison worlds and slave ships scattered throughout the system. It was the kind of complex operation that required perfect coordination between dozens of different species. "Begin the attack," Jake ordered. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Vorthak home fleet was enormous, with ships the size of cities and weapons that could destroy moons. But the Allied forces had something the Empire had never faced: unity born from shared suffering and a common desire for freedom. Princess Lyra coordinated the psychic abilities of the surviving Zephyrians with human electronic warfare specialists. The combination was devastating against Vorthak command structures. Enemy ships found their communications jammed and their sensors feeding them false information. "Vorthak flagship is firing on its own escort vessels," reported Lieutenant Ben Taylor from the sensor station. "They think we're attacking from that direction." "Excellent work, Princess," Jake said. "Keep them confused." On the prison world below, Colonel Frank Murphy led a combined assault force of humans and freed slaves. The Vorthak had never imagined that their prisoners might one day return as conquerors. The former captives fought with a fury that terrified their former masters, but the real shock came when the Vorthak Supreme Commander, The highest leader of their empire realized that his own forces were beginning to desert. Ships that had served the hegemony for centuries were switching sides, their crews no longer believing in Vorthok invincibility. "This is impossible," the Supreme Commander hissed to his advisors. "The lesser species are supposed to serve us. They cannot defeat us." "The humans have shown them a different way," one of his officers reported. "They offer alliance instead of conquest, cooperation instead of slavery." Aboard the Unity, Jake received reports from across the battlefield. The Allied forces were winning, but the cost was high. Many brave beings had died to reach this moment. He thought about all the worlds that had fallen to Vorthok brutality, all the families torn apart by their cruelty. "Captain Morrison," Princess Lyra called out, "I am detecting massive energy buildup from the Vorthok command fortress on the planet's surface. They are preparing to activate a weapon that could destroy our entire fleet." Jake looked at the tactical display. The fortress was heavily shielded and defended by thousands of weapons platforms. A direct assault would cost hundreds of ships and thousands of lives. But there was another way. "All ships, this is Morrison," he announced to the fleet. "The enemy is preparing a super weapon. I'm going to take a small team and disable it from the inside. Continue the battle and rescue as many prisoners as possible." "Jake, no," Lyra said, grabbing his arm. "It is too dangerous. Let someone else go." "I can't ask others to take risks I won't take myself," Jake replied. "Besides, we've come too far to fail now." Jake's assault ship dropped through the planet's atmosphere like a falling star, dodging defense fire from the surface. His team consisted of the best soldiers from multiple species, humans, Zephyrians, Kaleri, and even some former Vorthok who had joined the rebellion. The fortress was a nightmare of black metal and deadly technology. But Jake's team had learned from months of fighting the Vorthok. They knew the Empire's weaknesses, and more importantly, they knew how to work together. "There," Sergeant Linda Hayes pointed to a thermal exhaust port. "If we can get inside, I can guide us to the weapons power core." The infiltration was brutal. The team fought through corridors filled with desperate Vorthok defenders, each step bought with blood and courage. But they pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that millions of lives depended on their success. Princess Lyra, monitoring their progress from orbit, felt her heart breaking as she sensed Jake's pain through her psychic abilities. He had been wounded in the fighting, but refused to stop. The human determination that had first amazed her was now pushing him beyond the limits of endurance. "I have to help him," she told Captain Carter. "Princess, you're needed here to coordinate the psychic warfare," Carter replied. "No," Lyra said firmly. "I'm needed there. Jake saved me when I had lost everything. Now it's my turn to save him." Against all orders, Princess Lyra took a small ship and descended to the planet's surface. Using her psychic abilities, she located Jake's team just as they reached the weapon's power core. The human captain was barely conscious, held up by his loyal soldiers. "You came," Jake whispered as Lyra appeared beside him. "Humans don't abandon their friends," she said, repeating the words he had spoken to her months ago. "Neither do their allies." Together, Jake and Lyra disabled the super weapon, their combined human ingenuity and Zephyrian psychic power proving unstoppable. As the massive fortress began to shut down, the last hope of Vorthok victory died with it. The battle ended not with a final explosion, but with surrender. Across the system, Vorthok commanders were laying down their weapons, their empire's myth of invincibility finally broken. The Supreme Commander himself was captured while trying to flee in a small ship in the aftermath of victory. Jake and Lyra stood together on the observation deck of the Unity, watching as prison ships disgorged thousands of freed captives. Beings from hundreds of worlds were finally going home, their chains broken by an alliance that had seemed impossible just months before. "What happens now?" Lyra asked. "Now we build something better," Jake replied. "A galaxy where no one species rules over the others, where cooperation replaces conquest." Princess Lyra smiled, thinking about how much had changed since the fall of her world. She had been rescued by a human savior, but she now understood that the rescue had been mutual. Humanity had saved her people, but in doing so, they had also saved themselves from becoming just another conquered species. The Galactic Council will need a new structure, she said. Representatives from every species working together as equals. With humans and Zephyrians as founding members, Jake agreed. As they watched the celebrations spreading across the Allied fleet, both Jake and Lyra knew that this was not an ending but a beginning. The galaxy had learned that freedom was worth fighting for, and that even the mightiest empire could fall when faced with beings who refused to surrender their hope. The age of Vorthic dominance was over. The age of cooperation had begun, built on the foundation of human determination and alien wisdom, proving that the greatest strength in the universe was not weapons or technology, but the willingness to stand together against the darkness.